The Persian Empire was a glorious kingdom, full of riches, splendor, and majesty. The Persians had conquered the world. They invaded Israel and took many of God's people as exiles to Persia. So there were many Jews living there. The king of Persia was Ahasuerus, a mighty ruler. To celebrate his vast power and kingship, he hosted a banquet that lasted a whole week. People ate the finest food, drank the most expensive wine, and had all the entertainment they wanted. In the middle of the crazy party, Ahasuerus asked his beautiful wife, Vashti, to come before the people. He wanted to show off her great beauty. So the king's servants were sent to Vashti and told her she must come to the king to be displayed at the banquet. Queen Vashti did not want to be part of the drunken party and be disgraced like that, so she refused the king's order. This was unheard of. No one refused the king. When the king heard of this, he was furious. Who dare refuse the king? This would set an example to all the wives in the kingdom to disrespect their husbands. He had to set an example. So according to the advice of his experts in law, King Ahasuerus removed her crown, banished her from the kingdom, and declared that Persia had no more queen. When the king's anger finally subdued, he remembered Vashti and missed her. When his counselors saw his turmoil, they came up with a plan. They told the king to send out men to gather all the young, beautiful women in the kingdom and bring them before the king. This way he could choose from amongst them his new queen. The king liked this plan, and soon news spread throughout the kingdom. Throughout the empire, beautiful young girls were taken away, and after many days of beauty treatments, they were brought before the king. One such girl, Esther, lived with her uncle Mordecai. She was beautiful indeed, but she was also a Jew. After all the young girls the king met with, he decided that Esther was the most beautiful woman in all the land. He chose her to be his wife. Esther, the Jew, was now the queen of Persia. Esther was wise about her new position and kept her Jewish identity a secret, as there were some people in the land who hated the Jews. One of the king's most important officials was a man named Haman. He was a wicked man that hated the Jews. One day, Haman came before the king and presented a plan that made it sound like he was protecting the kingdom from potential enemies, but in actuality would annihilate all the Jews in the Persian Empire. Haman knew that once this edict was signed by the king, it would be irrevocable. So the king believed Haman, and the edict was signed. Because Esther kept her Jewish identity a secret, Haman did not know that she was part of the race he wanted to annihilate. When Mordecai, Esther's uncle, heard about the horrible new law, he was devastated. He and all the Jews across the land tore their clothes, placed ashes on their heads, and went into mourning. But God knew of all these things, and he helped Mordecai come up with a plan. Even though the law could not be changed, the simple fact that the queen of the empire was a Jew could somehow save them, since the king would never let his wife be killed. Mordecai then pleaded with Esther to make her identity known to the king. But Esther was afraid, as no one was allowed to appear before the king without an invitation, or you would certainly be put to death. Knowing this could cost her her life, she proceeded to dress in her finest royal clothing and went and stood in the inner court of the king's palace. When the king saw Esther, she found favor in his eyes, and he held out his scepter to her. This was the signal that the king allowed Esther to approach his throne. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? I'll give you anything, even half my kingdom," the king said. Esther's request was simple. She wanted to have a meal with Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and the king. She was going to find a way to tell the king about Haman's evil plot. Twice, Esther held a banquet for the king and Haman. And finally, on the second night, she revealed her Jewish identity to the king and explained to him the consequences of the terrible edict that would annihilate her and her people. When the king heard this, he was furious. He stormed out to the palace gardens. When he came back, he found Haman falling on the couch where Queen Esther was sitting, and in his rage thought that Haman was assaulting the queen. Immediately the king's guards grabbed Haman and took him away. Then one of the servants remembered the gallows that Haman built on which to hang Mordecai. He told the king about this, and the king ordered that Haman himself be executed on those very gallows. Once again, the queen risked her life and went before the king uninvited. She wept and pleaded to him, for the edict would still destroy her people. The king then issued a new one that gave all the Jews in the Persian Empire the right to take up arms and defend themselves against this coming attack. When that day finally came, the Jews rose up against their adversaries and took control of them. Even the palace officials and governors helped the Jews, and they were victorious. The Jewish people celebrated God's victory and instituted a festival that is yearly observed unto this very day. During the festival of Purim, the Jewish people recall God's provision and Esther's bravery.